Hey guys, Carl from Purple Misplaced. Today I'm taking a look at Flashback Lucy, the second game in the Flashback series after Flashback Zombie Kids from designers Gabriel Durnerin, Baptiste Derrez, and Marc-Antoine Doyon, and publisher Scorpion Masque. This is a sort of puzzle game in a box that's split up into chapters where in each chapter you're presented with a series of questions and then you're sort of examining the scene, turning over cards where each card represents the different perspective of somebody else or some other creature or something in that location, and using all of these perspectives to try and piece together what is going on, to try and figure out the story, and ultimately to answer the questions that you've been given. No disclaimer needed on this one because I did pick this one up on my own. Well, I should say here, and I'm going to point out again, I've said this before, this channel is sponsored by Noble Knight Games, a wonderful retailer of games in Wisconsin that also has an amazing online presence, really great used and rare game collection, great trade-in program. Definitely strongly recommend if you're looking for a good online retailer to pick up games from, check them out. And I'm going to beg you right now, do this every once in a little while, check out the link down below in the description. I do have an affiliate link that if you are going to make a purchase on Noble Knight, please remember to use my link to give a little bit of kickback back to this channel so I can keep these videos coming. With all that said, let's head down to the table to get a little peek at how this game plays, and then I'll meet you back up here to let you know what I think. All right, so here we have Flashback Lucy opening up that box to see what's inside aside from the rule book, and you'll see in a minute what becomes a storybook. I've got this deck of small cards, and I've got these 4 decks of big cards, and you'll see that this game will play out over 4 chapters, and each of these big decks will be played for each chapter. And for this video, I'm going to sort of start the first chapter, show you how the introduction works, show you a little bit about how the game works, but I'm not going to obviously show any of the sort of solutions to stuff. I'm not going to get through the first chapter because I don't want to spoil anything, but I wanted to give you some visual idea of how this game works, how it plays out. And to do that, we're going to first begin by opening the book. This explains how the game works, but I'll explain how all of that works in just a minute. But after that, it says, turn the page to start chapter 1. So we see here this. It says, I'm Lucy Estrange, 15. I love pasta, 70s music, and my cat Grebo, who's also my only friend. This is partly because we move a lot, and partly because I have a power I can't really talk about. If I find an object that was in the hands of someone who's disappeared, I relive their last vision. When I try to discuss this with my father, he gets uncomfortable and grumbles, if your mother were here. But my mother died when I was little, so it's hard to talk about it with her. Now it says to take these 2 mini cards. Let me zoom in this way for you to see. I'm looking for these 2 runes on mini cards and place them in the photo gallery on page 8. So I'm going to open up these mini cards. There is a cat, which you'll see what that does in just a minute. There's a bunch of brown cards, and then there's each of these colored cards that go with each of the chapters. So I'm looking for this sort of DNA strand looking one and this sort of pincher looking one. And that one and that one. All right, so turning those over first and looking, I'll put them in the photo page after we turn the page. But you see here first is Leonard Estrange, doting dad, awkward but well-intentioned. He's very, too protective, even if he doesn't understand much about my life and even less about my power. And then the other one I get is Esmeralda Cliff. It says, Mom, everyone tells me how much I look like her. I don't know anyone from her side of the family, and I don't really know how much about her. I feel like she's the only person who could have understood me. All right, so those will go into a photo album in a minute, and I'll show you what that means when we get there. But first, let's continue. It says, a few weeks ago, I received this intriguing letter along with this photo and pendant. My dearest Lucy, your mother probably never told you about me, which I expect is for the best. With this letter, you will find the papers making you the sole proprietor of our ancestral family home, Cliff Mansion. No one has lived there for years, and I can no longer take care of it. The recent events are proof of my failure. I no longer have the strength to protect the world from this mansion. I also pass on to you this pendant. Its symbol is the only thing that can hold back the terrible shadow that haunts this place. You are the last of our family's lineage. It's time to take your rightful place. I hope you can find a way to forgive me. Your Aunt, Alice Cliff. Then it says, a mansion all to ourselves? On the coast with nothing to pay? Happiness for my father, pure and simple. So that's that. We're moving, and so begins my story. So moving into chapter 1, which I'm going to show you just a little bit about, you'll see here there's a photo page. It says chapter 1, the day of the big move is finally here. While Dad lugs the last of the furniture inside, I'll take a look around the house with Grebo. So you'll see it's very cool. Each of these pages has little pieces cut out of them where this tape is, so you can sort of slot in all of these cards. Because what you'll see if you read the instructions at the start of the book is that these things means these people, as well as other things that you'll end up slotting into these pages, are going to be things that are going to be helpful for you throughout all of the chapters and not just for that first chapter. So those are sort of the cards from the deck that you're going to be saving as you move forward. All right, so then we get this comic book here. Let me zoom in just a little bit on that. And we see, go take a look inside. It's your house after all. There's even a greenhouse. Can you believe this? And a library. Perfect for a bookworm like you. Your room's upstairs. So she goes up into the room and finds her cat, Grebo. Bam! Door slams. The cat's sort of wandering around in a greenhouse. And you'll see these sort of half runes on the book. Those half runes are actually going to be things that we have to complete later when we find cards that match up with them. But meanwhile, it says take this mini card. So we're going to find the card with that symbol, which is this one right here. And then flipping that over, we see already a picture of her finding a baseball cap, maybe under the bed. But you'll see that this matches up with the picture. There's the circle, and there's the other half of that rune. So when I put that together, I need to find the rune that looks like that. Oops. So let me go ahead and find that rune. It doesn't want to stay there, but that's okay. I'm searching for this rune right here that matches that. So flipping that over, it says, the moment you hold the cap in your hands, you're thrown into one of your harrowing visions. Take card 1 from the 2015 vision. All right, so let me zoom back out just a little bit. We'll slide this book over to the side because we don't really need it right now. What we're going to need we're going to need all the small cards that we already had. We're going to need all of the cards that match the color of the chapter we're playing. And it did say 2015, so that's the blue cards. So I'm then going to take that deck of blue cards and turn over the first card, card 1. And you'll see what's going on here is we're now in the sort of visual perspective of the person who had been touching that hat last. And I can see sort of out of the eyes of the person whose hands these are. And then you'll notice that there are a couple of things on the card. First, there's this square with a question mark 1. And that means we've got question number 1 from this deck. It says, what happened to the owner of the cap? So in each chapter, there's going to be a series of questions that I need to answer at the end of the chapter. Now, there's no real way to fail this. You still move on to the next chapter, but you're going to get sort of a score based on how many of those questions you can answer correctly. And then you'll see here 13 and 9. And if you look carefully, 13 is a bird and 9 is this girl right here. And basically, when I draw that card, I'm going to then see from the perspective of that person or that creature or whatever the thing is. So let's go ahead and look at number 9, which is the girl's view out that window. And I see this. There's a guy standing outside, pointing at something. He's got view 11. So let's take a look at 11 and see what that guy's looking at / pointing at. All right, so here we go. Here's a couple of things. So he's pointing at this lady who, if I take 7, would be able to see through her eyes. 6 is another girl in here in the front door looking something. And we've got another question over here. This says question 3. So if we look at question 3, it says, in addition to the planks nailed across the front, what else should the teens have not broken on the mansion door? You'll also notice in that picture that there is a rune. So I should then find that rune card. So let's go ahead and do that. But in this case, you will see on that rune, there's a little cat paw. And what that means is that's actually going to get slid underneath this cat card. And I'm not going to look at that card until we go back to the comic book at the end of this chapter. So that's going to be something that, based on the memories, based on the things that I'm seeing in this scene, that's going to trigger something in the sort of present time when I go back to the present time of the comic book story. And maybe she'll, based on what she's discovered in the past, find something in the house or learn something about the house in the present time. And that's what that sort of represents. All right, and then I'm going to show you one last card because there's something else I want you to see. Looking through this lady's eyes to card 7. So here's card 7, and this is that boy again that we saw from the window pointing. And you'll see the 11 is there as well as there because we're getting a look down at him from the girl in this window, but then also directly at him from this lady. And in both cases, his eyes are seeing this image. But the last thing I wanted to show you before I stop showing you anything more to avoid more spoilers is on this card you see an eyeball. And when you see an eyeball, that means there's something in that scene that you can examine. And the way that works is the card will have the same number as the one you were just at, plus the little eyeball symbol. So having seen that, I can flip that over, and now I get this cool map that was laying sort of in the bag on the ground. So there's a physical object that I've discovered in the scene that gives me some kind of information that I will need to potentially answer the questions and solve the mystery of what's going on in this particular scene. And that's basically all I'm going to show you because I don't want to spoil anything else. There are some other fun things that come out through the 4 chapters. I'll talk very vaguely, briefly about them in my final thoughts. Otherwise, there's not a whole lot to talk about here. I could talk about the components. The card quality here is very nice. It's glossy. It's not a linen finish. Not that it really matters. But the artwork here is gorgeous. I love the way this game looks, both in the artwork in the world, plus in the artwork that we saw before in the comic book. It's very, very much modern sort of comic book style artwork that I love. I love the character designs in this game. These full art cards that show the scene and have really, really, really been paid attention to because, as you can see, each picture must be drawn sort of from the perspective of the person or character or whatever that should be looking at it. And that takes a lot of planning and a lot of design work, but it looks really, really cool and it works very, very well as far as art and design goes. That's basically all I want to show you. You already saw the box. The box is just a big empty hole for the big cards and a small hole for the little cards. Nothing else I want to say because I don't want to spoil anything else. Now meet me back up top, and having played through the whole 4-chapter experience, I will let you know what I think about this game. Welcome back. I hope that that overview was helpful for you. I did my best to sort of show you how this game works without spoiling too much of any of the puzzly stuff because, again, the whole point here is to solve the puzzle, to answer these questions, and to uncover the story as you're playing, and I didn't really want to ruin the experience. Now, that said, since recording this sort of overview of the game, I have heard some feedback on both social media and on comments on some of my videos that some of you would actually like to see me spoil just a little bit more of these games, maybe playing through a chapter, maybe playing through the first few puzzles in these kinds of games. Again, I still feel like it's not a great idea to spoil these things because then there's sort of no point to playing the game. But let me know down in the comments below how you feel about that. If you would like to see me sort of solve a few of the puzzles in these games to sort of give you more of an idea of how it works or give you more of an idea of what the story and so on looks like in these games. And I'll take that into consideration in future videos like this one. Now, with that said, let's go ahead and get into my thoughts on this game. This is now the second game in the series, and I did cover the first game as well, the Flashback Zombie Kids. You can check that out up there. I actually covered that one with my nephew Wyatt, and I actually played through that game twice, once with my son and daughter, who were actually 3 and 5, so I did a lot of sort of hand-holding, but they did a lot of the solving of the puzzle, which was really cool. And then I sort of kind of GM'd my way through the second time playing with my 2 nephews, and one of those nephews was who gave the sort of feedback on the last one. Now, Flashback Lucy is the next one in the series. It is the sort of next evolution on that sort of core mechanism of answering questions by looking at a scene through different viewpoints and trying to piece everything together to figure out what's going on. But I will say right up front here that this game is marked at a slightly higher, maybe more than slightly higher age level. And I have to say, now having played through this, I agree with that. It's not like it's super dark or super scary or super anything else, but thematically this is sort of occulty and witchy, and there's magic and there is some violence, potentially death. I don't want to spoil the story, but it does get somewhat dark. Now, the cartoony sort of illustrations still remain that sort of animated cartoon kind of illustration. They have gotten a little bit more mature, but it is still very cartoony. It's not gory. It's not super dark in any kind of way. But if you played the original game, Flashback Zombie Kids, with little kids, you're not going to want to bring the little kids into this because it might be scary, it might be dark, there may be themes you don't want the kids to know about yet. I just wanted to point that out up front. With that said, I continue to really enjoy this series. It's a really interesting take on things because for the most part, it's not about solving a puzzle like an escape room in a box kind of puzzle. It's not sort of leaps in logic figuring things out. This is sort of all of the information is presented to you, but you have to be observant. This is all about making observations and then using those observations to make inferences to answer the questions that you're given. And this one certainly stepped things up quite a bit from Zombie Kids, meaning that in Zombie Kids, for the most part, if you looked at all the cards, you could answer all the questions because sort of each question was basically just telling you find this card and see what's going on. This one had you sort of piece things together a little bit more than the original one did. It wasn't just about finding the card, but sometimes it was finding something that was kind of hidden on the card or finding information on a couple of different cards and sort of piecing those together to sort of extrapolate the meaning that answered the question that was being asked. So there was a little bit more in this than there was in the original one as far as solving the puzzles goes, and that sort of fits in with the increased age level of the theme as well. And I enjoyed this one quite a bit, even more so than the original. Now the original, again, because it was more cartoony themed and I was able to play it with my kids, that gets a little bit of a bump up for that. But this one on its own by myself, I played this one and I enjoyed it quite a bit. It may still be a little bit easy for somebody like me who enjoys puzzles a lot, but what that does throw in instead is some cool story and some cool mechanical interesting stuff. And let me get into more of the mechanics here because this one does something another bit different than the Zombie Kids one in that the Zombie Kids game played out completely in the cards. And everything you were seeing and doing and learning was through the cards. And it was sort of telling a linear story as you went from chapter to chapter to chapter, setting a scene, sort of following what was going on in that scene. This one is a little bit different because this one, and the main character in this game, Lucy, has the power that when she touches something, she sort of gets a vibe and she sort of flashes back to the last person who touched that object. And she's just moved into this new sort of old house and she finds an object that sort of gives her this flashback to her family's history in that house. And then the way that this game works is it sort of interweaves between sort of modern time and ancient time. And that ancient time keeps changing. Each chapter is a further flashback into the past. Because you saw in my sort of overview, some of the cards that I'm finding, I don't look at until the end of that chapter. And what that represents thematically or story-wise is that based on the flashbacks she's having, based on the story she's learning through that chapter, she then realizes something about the house that she's actually physically in the modern times, and then goes to that location in the house to find a new object, touches that object, and that new object flashes back even further, and then again the same thing. So in the next flashback, she discovers something new about the house that gives her another flashback, discovering something new about the house, flashing back, and so on. So each chapter is a different piece of history, slowly flashing back further and further to sort of build the history of her family's story. And it really works out pretty interestingly to see, you know this, and well, now you know this, and now you know this, and now you know this. So you're sort of slowly building out this understanding of her family and how things have become the way that they are, and what's up with this house, and what's up with the stuff she keeps finding in the house, and so on. And then on top of that, the way that it plays out in addition to the flashback card system is that now the rule book, the instruction book, has comic books in it. So each chapter starts off with a comic of Lucy doing something in the house that transitions into that game. But then also some of the cards you're pulling out from that game, often the ones that happen at the end of the chapter, are overlapping the picture of the comic book to actually physically change what's happening in that sort of cell of the comic book. And it's kind of cool because it's almost adding motion to each of these individual frames of the comic book and seeing things happen in the place that she is, learning more about the house, learning more about her family. And I'm a big fan of comics, and the comic book art in this really does work for me. So thematically and story-wise, it was a whole lot of fun to sort of turn the page to continue the story of the comic and then flash back into these cards, then come back into that comic book story that was playing out. And I really did enjoy that. Now, in the original game, Flashback Zombie Kids, there were some gadgets that you found along the way. And the gadgets let you interact with the cards in different ways to find things that you weren't able to find before you had those gadgets. This game doesn't have any gadgets. There are twists, there are changes, but there are no physical interactive gadgets for the most part, without spoiling too much. Which means it's a little bit less exciting as far as that goes. Now, there is in one of the chapters a sort of unique way to interact with the cards. There is in another chapter a unique way or a different way to use the cards to sort of solve a puzzle. And there is another chapter that does get physical outside of the cards, but in a different way than the gadgets from the first game. So each chapter in this does add some kind of wrinkle or some kind of twist to the way that you're interacting with the game. But ultimately, I think it wasn't as physically engaging as the first one was, simply because you weren't really interacting with the cards in any kind of new way physically, except for the second chapter, which, I don't want to spoil anything, does have you do something without the use of a gadget that does sort of switch things up a little bit. But what that also means is this is a linear story that ends. Whereas I really enjoyed in the original box, the Flashback Zombie Kids, that at the end of the game it said, okay, there's something else going on. And now that you have all these gadgets, go back to the chapters where you didn't have the gadgets, because now you can use those gadgets to find out even more. So after you finished the story, there was like a, hey, but we tricked you because there's lots more hidden stuff. Now go back and find all these things, answer all these questions, find one more thing. And then there was like an additional extra epilogue at the end of the story. And I thought that was really cool that you were playing through each of these small chapters, and then suddenly there was another puzzle that extended across all of the chapters of the game, which is fun to see. Unfortunately, this one doesn't have that. This one has the 4 chapters, and then there's a hard end, and that's that. Does it ruin the experience? No, because the core experience is still there. The different twists on things do still work. It's still an interesting thing. I still really enjoy the narrative here, probably more than I did in the original game. The addition of the comics, the addition of the overlaid cards, and so on, did make for an interesting experience. But ultimately, I'm a fan of this system, and I can't wait to see. I'm sure they've done 2 now. One sort of childish, one more adult. Do they continue getting more sort of mature? I don't mean I want like some weird X-rated strange thing, but I do mean that there could be some serious sort of heavy narrative kind of story told with a system like this. Or, hey, I'd be fine with them going back to a more cartoony, childish version of things too. I don't really care what the story that is being told is, so long as that story being told is a fun one, an interesting one, and challenging, not challenging, but interesting to dig through all of the different pieces and sort of puzzle it all together. So I'm a huge fan of this system. I can't wait to see what happens next. Ultimately, the interactivity, I think, of the first one was a little bit better. The story of this one, the concepts of this one, I think, were a little bit better than the first. I think they're both great games. I think if you've got kids, definitely play the Zombie Kids version with your kids. It's a whole lot of fun. Even if the kids aren't quite up to the task of putting things together, working with them to solve the puzzle was a whole lot of fun. And this one, if you have older kids, bring them along for a second ride as well, because this is a lot of fun. And again, it gets dark, but not super like mature dark. Just don't bring along the little kids from Zombie Kids, but also if you're an adult and you want to try this on your own, this one's a little bit more grown up than the other one, but hey, as a guy who likes cartoons and silly stuff, I would play the Zombie Kids one myself as well. Anyway, I'm rambling. Flashback is a really cool series. I definitely strongly recommend both of these. Definitely check this one out if you are a fan of weird, occult, kind of witchy stories told through, not haunted, but an old kind of haunted, old historical house that's weird and misunderstood or not understood as the person sort of digs through and learns more about it. I had a blast. I think you might too. If this is the kind of game you might be interested in, I strongly recommend checking it out. I'll stop rambling there. I do again thank you for watching. I hope that this video was helpful for you. As always, if you did enjoy the video, I do ask that you like, subscribe, and click the bell icon below, and I'll see you all next time. Thanks.